What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video, and in this week's video I'm just going to be talking about and going through some studies and some research on what the optimal frequency is if your goal in the gym is hypertrophy. Alrighty guys, so before we get into it, I would just like to make sure we're all on the same page of what frequency and hypertrophy is. When I say frequency, I'm talking about the number of times per week that you train a certain muscle group, not just the overall number of times per week you're in the gym. So I want to make that a clear distinction first off. And two, when we're talking about hypertrophy, or if you're training for hypertrophy, that just basically means you're training to build muscle mass, to build size, to get bigger. And the optimal frequency for training for hypertrophy, to build size, to build muscle, is actually different than if your goal is just primarily strength. So I want to get that out of the way as well. So first, in my research, I went to a 2016 paper by Alexander Bobin from the University of Central Florida that talks about the effects of resistance training frequency on muscle hypertrophy and strength. So basically, this paper took 5 studies that were done and kind of compiled them together to give an overall sort of view of their conclusions, and 4 out of the 5 studies found that training frequencies greater than 1 time per week led to not only greater hypertrophy but also greater strength. There was only 1 study that found no difference in muscle size between training 3 times per week and once per week, and this was a 2014 Schoenfield study. But in my opinion, this isn't as accurate as it could be, because in the study, the 2 groups that were being tested performed different training routines. So as they're not matched routines and not matched volume, I don't see a whole lot of legitimacy in that paper. And I don't think Schoenfeld did either, because he came out with a 2015 paper showing that training 3 days per week was superior to once, and that the 3 days a week group gained more muscle and got stronger. This was also confirmed by 3 other studies, a 2003 paper that came to the conclusion that the group that overreached by increasing resistance training frequency got bigger and stronger than the group that trained only 1 muscle per day a week. Same thing was found in a 1990 Hoffman paper that found that 4 and 5 days per week was superior to 3. And then lastly, this was confirmed by a 2000 McLester paper that found training a muscle 3 times per week was superior to once per week. I think we can pretty much establish that a training frequency greater than 1 time per week is optimal, but I don't think in these 5 studies that it really gives a solid number on what your training frequency should be. And as well, I think these papers are kind of outdated, as the newest one is a 2015 study, and at the rate that science and technology advances, I really think this is kind of outdated and old. So I went to look for some other things as well, and I came up with a 2018 paper that found something pretty interesting. So this was a Zeroni 2018 paper looking at training frequency, and it had 2 groups of total of 18 decently strength trained men. And what they mean by decently strength trained is that their average bench press exceeded 4 plates, which is over 100 kilograms, which means they at least have been training for some considerable amount of time. And what the study did was randomize the 18 men into 2 groups. One group did a 5-day full body split, and then the second group did a 5-day split as well, but more of a bodybuilding or bro type split, only training each muscle group really 1 time per week. And what they found was pretty interesting. So they tested bench 1 rep max, a squat 1 rep max, a row 1 rep max, as well as bicep thickness, tricep thickness, and quad thickness. Now, there was not much difference in the percentage gain between the bicep 1 rep max and the row 1 rep max, but there was a large increase in the squat run rep max for the 5-day full body split routine group. And I think that this large difference can be attributed to that the bro split group was only training legs once per week, whereas the full body every day was training legs 5 times per week. Now it's also worth mentioning in the study that volume as well as exercises were matched in this study, so both groups did the same amount of reps and the same exercises. It was just the time and really the way in which the exercises were performed that was changed. Now what was interesting was that bicep thickness, tricep thickness, and quad thickness all had a very large percentage gain in the full body group compared to the bro split group. In some cases even about double in the bicep thickness group. And I think some of this can be attributed to the researchers didn't really account for how triceps are accessory muscles in any chest movement, and biceps are accessory muscle groups in any sort of back movement. So the biceps and triceps were getting even more work in the 5-day full body split than what they previously thought. But still, the disparity between the two groups is pretty impressive, to where I still think there's some truth to the very high frequency training in terms of hypertrophy. Now what was also interesting to note is that this study took into account the session rating of perceived exertion, or RPE. And in both these groups, it did not differ, which I think is impressive, because that basically means that between the two groups, they both exerted the same amount of energy and both had the same amount of stress on the body, whereas the full body group received about double the percentage gain in bicep, tricep, and quadricep thickness. Now I thought that was pretty interesting, and I haven't really seen any 5-day full body splits before, but I was still kind of skeptical, as this was taking really more trained advanced men, and I think that for new or even intermediate lifters, that you can get the same results with much less frequency and volume than doing a 5-day full body split. So the last article I want to talk about is an article written by Tom McCormick on the optimal frequency training for hypertrophy. And if you don't know who Tom McCormick is, he's a personal trainer, online coach. He has degrees in sports science and coaching, as well as a strength and conditioning degree. So he knows what he's talking about for the most part. And in this article, he really talks about emphasizing frequency for each muscle group, and how frequency is not a cookie cutter, one size fits all thing for each muscle group, and each muscle reacts differently to different amounts of stress and volume and things like that. So he really advocates for optimizing frequency for each muscle group. And he talks about things like fast and slow twitch muscle fibers, and how fast twitch muscle fibers respond better to lower frequency and higher intensity, so higher weight exercise, and slow twitch muscle fibers react better to higher frequency, lower intensity exercise. So he gives kind of a general rule for the most of this, saying that the chest, being fast twitch muscle fibers, would benefit more from a lower frequency, higher intensity style training, along with the triceps and the biceps. He also says that muscle groups like the shoulders, spinal erectors, and the calves would respond better to higher frequency and lower intensity training, as they are generally more slow twitch muscle fiber dominant. This varies from person to person, and that you should really figure out what works best for you, and to use this as a general guide. And then lastly, he kind of gives an overall of guide of frequency per muscle group, saying that the biceps, rear and lateral delts and calves can be trained 4 times per week. The back and triceps could be trained 3 times per week, and the quads, hamstrings, chest, and anterior delts could be trained 2 times per week. Again, that's a general rule, and he's very clear about that. It does not fit everybody, and you really should tailor your training to yourself and how your body reacts, but to use that kind of as a general guide and way to at least start structuring your training. So overall, I think we can agree that a training frequency higher than 1 time per week is going to be beneficial. But as far as how many times per week specifically, I think that's kind of up in the air and really up to you. Something that I also like that Tom said in his paper was going on a normal 2 times per week frequency training split, like a push-pull legs sort of routine, and then in periods of plateaus or where you really want to boost progress, bumping that frequency up to 3, 4, or even 5 times per week for a short period of time, just several weeks or a month or things like that, and then bumping it back down to your normal 2 times per week frequency, just so your body doesn't get used to that super high frequency, and then you only have to add more from there. But anyways, guys, that's pretty much all for this week's video. I hope you liked it. I hope you found something informative or interesting. I definitely learned some new things making this, but yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.